And so we break it down here, and this may look familiar to you. This is an industry standard, the NIST framework. We're going to talk about each of these and try to give you an overall picture of what's included in a mature cybersecurity practice. Now, there are levels of maturity within each of these. We're going to go over it at somewhat of a high level, but just understand that this is a process of continuous improvement from top to bottom. Whereas you learn from the previous event. So let's just get started. First, you got to understand, what it is you're protecting, right? You have to understand what it is you're protecting in order to protect that, and that's the identity phase, the category of identifying, the assets, where your data is, the systems that are in control of processing that data and making use of it, the connectivity and network that it's connected to, who has access, what do they need to do when they have access, understanding that threats that are out there to your unique organization, particular industry-specific threats, particularly with SCADA, with operational technology that's not so common in the broader scheme of IT assets that people normally think about. There's application-specific hardware that maybe isn't as up to date, that isn't on a constant patch schedule in order to maintain its security posture. So understanding where that risk lies is critical. You have to know what it is you're protecting in order to protect it. And so we do things like inventory, getting a good sense of the hardware and the software that's in the environment, taking a baseline assessment of, okay, here's what we have and here's where we're at with our security posture. Here are the assets, here's the security posture, and here are vulnerabilities within that software that need to be addressed straight away. And so having continuous vulnerability management on your IT assets is critical in order to identify potential risks so that we can move to the next phase, protect it, right? You've got to patch those systems. You have to maintain identity and access control to those systems so that only the individual folks that need to access the environment can, with the least privilege enabled, so that they can only do what they need to do and nothing else. The data itself needs to be encrypted. So bystanders or folks that gain access to it can't read it when it's at rest or even in motion when it's being sent throughout the network or outside of your organization. It needs to be encrypted. Network security is as IT security professionals, we often think about workstations, servers, cloud sources, but network security is critical as well. In order to create these segmentation and boundaries within your environment is important, and then you need to police those boundaries to make sure that, much like identity and access management with people accessing certain resources, applications with themselves, systems being able to access other systems. If you can strictly control that, you greatly reduce the risk of problems spreading if one system takes a hit or a collection of like systems take a hit. That's important. And one way to do that is firewalls. These are traditional methods. You need protections in place at those network boundaries. So when you think of firewalls, you might think of internal versus external, which is true, but there's also things called internal segmentation firewalls, ISF. And this goes to the point of network security and segmentation. In order to police the boundaries that you implement with that segmentation, it's important to have those internal segmentation firewalls to really control those boundaries, to make sure you can grant access, and more importantly, have visibility into the access that is granted. So not only segmenting and making sure you have tough boundaries, but monitoring those boundaries, getting logs, running intrusion detection in between those segments is a critical aspect to protect the environment. And then you're probably more familiar with the endpoint protection. These are softwares and configurations on the endpoints to put your best security posture forward. identify and block automatically traditional threats, viruses, malware, advanced persistent attacks that can only be found with behavior analytics. So next generation endpoint protection is critical as well. So what you've done, you've identified your environment, you understand what's in it, you understand the risk that is posed, you have protections put into place to mitigate that risk. But we all know cybersecurity is not 100%. There's no silver bullet. So you have to have total threat visibility. What does that mean? That means you have to have logs and visibility into the network traffic, into the IT assets, into every packet that's going back and forth in your environment in order to triage and look for telltale signs of when those protections fail. And we do that with detection. Easier said than done. We're talking about 24/7 folks that are ingesting mountains of information, doing the triage, oftentimes with AI enhanced capabilities, if you have the right tools in place for that threat visibility, to kind of weed out the noise from the signal. And then once you get that signal, it needs to be investigated. Is this a threat or not? Is it a false positive? Is this an indicator of compromise or attack? And what's the context behind that? Who, what, where, how many systems, who's logged in right now? Gathering that information in an efficient manner and being able to identify the context of possibility of attack is the real labor-intensive stuff that you need that a SOC security operation with mature security practices can accomplish. And so that MDR, or managed detection response, is the outcome of that continuous monitoring with your security operations center to find those telltale signs, indicators of compromise, indicators of attack. The tool we use for that, in addition to all those protection softwares, firewalls, configurations for your cloud services, for your on-prem services, is what we call a SIEM, or Security Information Event Management. What this is going to do, it's going to aggregate all that information, that telemetry from all those systems, whether they're endpoint, cloud, network, application, and use some AI, machine learning, and correlation statistical thresholds to boil the ocean, to bring things to the top, to identify particular incidents. And these can be worked, triaged, and investigated with that security operations center to get that context we're looking for, so that we can move on to the next phase of the NIST framework, which is respond. So we've boiled the ocean, we've found the needle in the haystack, we've determined it's a problem, it's an incident. So now what do? You have to have a plan in place. That goes back to the mature security processes that need to have. The processes themselves to identify the threat are one thing, but then now that you know, what are you going to do? There's a good study every year that Verizon puts out on breach reports. They talk about the time a breach happens to the time to detection and the time to response after detection. And you'll find that commonly it takes a long time to detect threats because folks don't have mature security practices in place. But more surprisingly, there's often weeks and sometimes months after detection to respond to it, because maybe they don't have the full context, or they're still trying to figure out, or they don't have the proper planning in place prior to the incident happening in order to take action, to respond to that threat, essentially nipping it in the bud before it becomes business impacting. Isolating a compromised machine before that compromise can spread, identifying an attacker that got through with a phishing attack and is logging into systems remotely without anybody knowing, or being found out and not knowing what to do and how to stop these things. And so instant response planning and tabletop exercises and reacting to that detected breach is critical. And having the capability to dive into the data even further than the detection, the forensics, and going further into the context to tell the story of the attack path is critical in your response. And then what is your communication strategy? Who owns those systems? Are they business critical? Having that knowledge advance is paramount in being able to, again, detect and prevent this from becoming business impacting. So definitely have a communication strategy on internally, who do we call, who do we contact, who can get us to a steady state again, what systems are involved, and do we have the skill set to make sure that we communicate with those stakeholders of those systems, but also potentially customers or regulatory bodies. What needs to happen? When does it come to a point where we need to bring in third-party incident response or contact the FBI or notify our shareholders or the SEC in some cases, right? So having all these plans in place and then testing them is important for the response capability. And then obviously the idea here is once you find that detected breach, you contain it, minimize the impact, fix it, understand what happened, nip it in the bud again before it spreads, and then you can recover from that. So you've contained it, you've ran your run books, you have your plan, and you recover from that.
Yep, sorry.
That's all right. And so you have to have that, what do we do in case of disaster? How are we going to back up these systems that have been compromised and restore it to steady state? Is there a secondary site for business continuity? Is there a different phone system in case this one fails? Do we have backup systems to get that production line running again? And then learning from that. Again, we talked about the continuous improvement process of the NIST framework and a good security, mature security practice, post-incident analysis. What can we learn from what we just went through? That feeds back into the identify phase, right? So we've identified threats, we've protected against them, we've done our best, we detected something that got through, we've responded, we have the context, we've recovered from that, and now during that recovery phase, we learn from that process, we fed that back into the identify the threat because it's a new threat that we just discovered and recovered from. Now we can implement protections against it to mature and enhance our security posture moving forward. So it's that process of learning and continuous improvement as indicative of a mature security practice. And then overall, the governance of the how do you make sure we've implemented this continuous improvement? How do we know we have the right technical controls, the policies, procedures put into place, the business continuity plan, the ability to identify, protect, detect, respond? Well, there's strategies and frameworks like the NIST cybersecurity framework that have levels of maturity that can constantly be improved, that can constantly mature. And so having somebody on an advisory role to provide that information, to set priority, to determine the roadmap of how are we going to continue to reduce risk as it relates to cybersecurity, having that expertise is critical. And then compliance management. That advisory not only is security posture for its own sake important to protect against halts in production, but oftentimes you'll find, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, your clients demand it. If you want, for example, if you happen to be in the supply chain for any Department of Defense or government organization, there's compliance. You have to check these boxes in order to do business with us, and you have to have in place compliance and have the practice of continuous security improvement covering all these categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Where are you with that? What do we need to be doing to make sure we meet those requirements? How are we going to continually improve this to make sure every year or every so often that it's audited? We can say, yes, we are involved in that practice, and we are enhancing our security and meeting these requirements so that we can do business with XYZ or government agencies. And so understanding, checking the box is one thing, but also the risk, the associated risk with that. How are we going to reduce the risk to halt of production in manufacturing environment. That's critical, and that VC, so that virtual chief information security officer, can aid and strategize and guide you through that, so that you can develop risk management and make sure you're allocating resources effectively in the most effective manner to meet not only compliance but an increased security posture. So that's a good high level of what strategies manufacturing, any organization, but particularly uniquely to manufacturing, because it's so critical. How you get started with your cybersecurity journey. Again, it's got to be holistic. It's got to have the people, the process, and the technology in place in order to accomplish that. And Ascend is very well versed in that, all the way through the technical, but also having the people with mature processes to effectively and efficiently accomplish that goal of no business impacting breaches, as well as the governance and guidance to make sure as threats evolve and your dynamic environment expands, contracts, whatever that might be, we can stay on top of that and making sure we're putting your best foot forward as it relates to cybersecurity.